Today I made my DBA laugh at a database issue 15 plus years in the making, by user Scorpius187. This year has been a banner year for me when it comes to solving old problems that have plagued my company for years, and today is no exception. Today, in the process of solving the immediate issue at hand, I tackled the underlying issue which, as far as I can tell, has been a problem since at least 15 years ago. So today I noticed that one of my SQL jobs failed. Having experienced failures with this particular job before, I knew it was probably a disk space issue. Makes sense, since the job that failed was the daily database backup job. I checked the disk space and, sure enough, 13 MB free on the 450 GB SQL DB drive. Delete out a bunch of old backups, now we're up to 250 GB free. Yay! But when I was looking through the backups, one set of backups for one particular database called staging area was 40 GB. For each daily backup file. Check the DB itself. 110 GB. This database had been pretty big already before, but now it's just getting ridiculous. So I decide that today is the day I'm going to fix whatever's causing this once and for all. Tried to shrink the DB and the log files, no difference. So I start running some reports on it to see what the issue might be. Decide to run a disk usage by table report. One particular table in this database, TBL contacts, has checks number, rechecks number. So I call up my contact at our MSP, who is not just our main point of contact there, but he's also a damn good database admin, and I'm like, dude, can you help me figure out what I'm looking at here? I can't even run queries on this table cause it's so friggin' huge. He looks at the email I sent him with the screenshot of the report and immediately starts laughing hysterically. That's a great sign. Alright, so, let me explain a little bit about how this process is supposed to be working. Our company has websites that our clients use to keep track of the current inventory of merchandise they have on hand at each location. Every week they report to us how much merch they have left so we can then determine how much we need to send them each week to keep them from running out. This information used to exist on an external web host. To get the data from the web server imported into our internal system, we had a SQL Server Integration Services package that would run once an hour, downloading the data from the website into a staging area database and making minor manipulations to it before inserting the new information into our main database for our internal management application. An outgoing SSIS package would also run that did the same thing in reverse, sending updated internal information out to the web server database via the middleman staging area database. Since we've moved everything under one roof with our MSP, we now have everything on the same SQL server, but these packages still run because we haven't had the time or the manpower to rewrite them. I'm just one man, legitimately, I've been the only IT person in the company for the past 6 years. And one step inside one of these packages is where the problem lies, as the specific package that sends data from the internal database to one of the website databases is missing one important line from a SQL script embedded in it. The very first step in that package is to delete all of the important data tables from the staging area database, then copy the ones from the internal database in their place. Only the script that deletes all the tables doesn't include a line to delete TBL contacts. So instead of deleting that table and replacing it, the SSIS package just reinserts all the data again. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, except that the staging area version of this table doesn't have a primary key, as staging area is just a go-between database and it needs to keep the contact ID value from the original table. Unfortunately, due to this table not having a primary key, it also means that you can insert the exact same data into the table multiple times. The TBL contacts table in the internal database has grown from about 2,000 records originally to just over 150,000 records, which are apparently being reinserted into the staging area database each time this process runs, 6 times a day. Back to today. Me and my friend at the MSP eventually get a query to run on that table and confirm that we are in fact getting multiple inserts of the exact same data. 11,000 times, to be exact. The main reason no one caught it before was the next step in the job is to update the existing records in the web database, and only insert new ones. Since the reinserted records all continued to have the same contact ID, they didn't show up as new, and therefore the job didn't import them into the web database. So the web database has the correct number of records, and thus hasn't ballooned in size like staging area has. And that's how you get the largest database table my DBA friend had ever seen in his life, to the point where he just burst out in laughter when he saw how many records were in it. TLDR, database balloons in size over time to eventually take up nearly half the available disk space on the drive due to a missing line in a SQL script that wasn't picked up on for at least 15 years. Edit, just a brief update. I truncated the table and reran the job to import the data. Here were the results. All in a good day's work. XD. And her mouse never broke again, by user Joa Donfan. We had a contract to supply 3 techs plus a supervisor on site at the HQ of a large international corporation. I was one of the techs. It wasn't a bad gig, except for that one attorney who insisted we fix an HP laser jet. This was before personal laser printers, pretty sure it was an LJ3, that had been dropped and had a bent everything. I turned him over to the supervisor, and that's pretty much that story, except for the part that no, we didn't fix that printer. I should also mention this supervisor was hired for this position, and as part of the deal to hire him he was being given formal CNE training. Ain't gonna lie, this rubbed us 3 techs, who were doing the training on our own, pretty bad, but he really wasn't a bad guy. It did take us a bit to warm up to him, and the story I'm about to tell helped. This story involves a user who needed a new mouse about every 5 or 6 weeks. It would just stop working and of course she had no idea what was happening to it. This was back in the mid-90s, folks, and mice with a ball and other moving parts and stuff, weren't as cheap as they are now. One day I was helping a user near her, and every so often I'd hear a bang or thud or smash coming from Mouse Lady's desk. This was an open floor plan department and I saw what was happening. Every so often she'd pick up the mouse and pound it on her pad. The look on my face must have said something because the person I was helping said, "She does that all day." I went back to our little corner of HQ and was telling the guys about it, when the supervisor told us to let us know the next time she needs a new mouse he'll take care of it. And he did. He took her a new mouse one day and returned with a disassembled mouse, saying something like we shouldn't be hearing from her in a while. Of course, we asked what he did and he showed us. He pointed at the logic board for the mouse and pointed at some random component, grinning. "See the value on that impact capacitor," he told us. "You only see something that high on something that had a couple of bricks dropped on it. I've been dying to try that on someone since, but alas. No one else is in the habit of slamming their mouse on their desk anymore. Heart attack because of duplicate host names, by user The Sheepbarn. Obligatory long-time lurker, first-time poster. So this just happened 30 minutes ago. I work for a software vendor as an applications programmer, software architect, and sysadmin, basically I'm engineering. The vendor in question deals with project management and accounting. The software solution that we sell offers the client the option of self-hosting on-prem. And one of our clients, our largest client, has decided to self-host, and have done so that last 10 years or so. The machine has been in the server rack from before anyone in IT at the client can remember. About 2 years ago we recommended they acquire new hardware for a new release of the software, from one major version to the next, so major in fact that the underlying virtual machine hosting went from QEMU VMs to LXD containers. So basically a ground-up overhaul of the infrastructure. This was during the time of my predecessor who in his enlightened wisdom of 25+ years working the role decided to name the new host the same as the old host. Which didn't cause any problems due to how the networking was set up. Due to reasons, a department of the client had stuck to the previous version while the rest of the company moved on to the new version, so we maintained the old version for them. No new updates, just keeping the thing chugging along. About a week ago the old host started to have a drive failure in its RAID 1 with 2 disks, so the decision was made to migrate the remaining department's data to the new host and have them work on the new version going forward. The hardware gods had spoken, there was nothing they could do. The migration worked flawlessly, and a plan to clean up the old host was put in place. Fast forward to 30 minutes ago. Now I previously worked at a cybersecurity software vendor as a software engineer. And when you spend every day working with cybersecurity analysts and penetration testers, you learn a thing or two. So I spent the day talking with them since we still keep in touch and joking about how I should go ahead and wipe the old host and nuke its contents so they are unrecoverable. We settled on the idea that shred would be ideal, so after the final backups had ran for the old host, the command, shred vfzn7/dev/sda was entered into the remote SSH session that I had up. And I didn't think twice, it had all been planned and everything. I had been given the go-ahead. No sooner than 5 minutes later, I noticed the prompt. The host name was exactly the same as the host name of the new host. I however did not know this until I tried to log in through another shell to the old host and to the new host. The old host had already lost the SSH authorized _keys file and the new host logged in fine, so my worry was put aside. That said, I still had to test it several times to make sure and confirm it in my head. But for all of 5 minutes I had the sinking feeling that I just nuked the new host and all the financial data of the client with it. Luckily we had backups if anything did go wrong. But that was one of the most terrifying moments of my career to date. Lesson to be learned: no matter how smart you are, don't name two remote machines with the same host name for the same client. It could lead to some very octane-filled heart-racing moments. TLDR, previous engineer gives old host and new host the same host name, causing high stress during the process of nuking the old host. Edit 1, spelling. Edit 2, further spelling. It won't fit? I'll make it fit, by user 7th core. So one of my friends was complaining a bit that she's running low on storage space on her laptop. It's an HP Omen 17 and she had a 1TB hard drive and a 1TB SSD. I found her a 5TB Seagate Barracuda for $120. She ordered it and we waited till it arrived. Now some of you might know where this is going. A standard 2.5-inch hard drive is 9mm tall but the 5TB one is 15mm. I didn't think of that at the time and was in for a bit of a shock when I opened the packing for it. I opened her laptop, opened the new hard drive packing and guess what? The mounting bracket didn't fit. It was a rubber bracket with mounts that go in the screw holes, and then you slide it in with the hard drive at an angle of about 45 degrees and then push it down. The SATA and SATA power connector was on a ribbon cable. The laptop chassis had enough room for the 15mm 5TB hard drive, but no way of mounting it. So what do? Grab a spare Ethernet cable and cut off its insulation. Connect the hard drive to the laptop, put it inside, and stuff the insulation around it. It was a perfect fit. I even turned the dang thing around and banged on it from the top with my hand to see if it would fall out. It didn't even budge. Took a bit of cable insulation and put it on top of the hard drive so the bottom cover of the laptop would be squishing on it a bit, and that was that. DIY jank hard drive mount status achieved. She was happy. I was relieved. The hard drive is working still to this day without problems. And I had another funny tale to tell. More Than Meets the Eye, by userdictionary 600. At the crappy game room store I used to work at, one of the pinball machines out on the floor hadn't been turned on since before I started there. Before I tried to turn it on, however, I figured it was turned off for a reason and decided I'd open it up and inspect it. Pinball machines don't just have one box that's the power supply like computers do. That is handled by a bare transformer sitting in the bottom of the cabinet, whose outputs usually go up a cable to a power board that has the fuses along with the rest of the power supply, and that board also controls the solenoids. I opened up the back box and found that, of course, all the fuses were wrapped in tinfoil. Yikes! Not to mention there was a ton of chewing gum and duct tape style of wiring repairs, if you know what I mean. Double yikes! I took pictures. Well, let's see. First order of business is to actually put the proper fuses in. Thankfully, the fuse holders are marked on the board itself with the correct value. Unfortunately, it takes me almost the whole workday to find anything in this place. Some of them came from half-gutted scrap machines in the back room. I put all the hard-earned fuses in their rightful place. There is one more, the main fuse before the transformer, that is blown. At least it's not wrapped in tinfoil, but it was a much higher value than was supposed to be in there. If memory serves, it was a 10 amp fuse where a 3 amp was the expected value. I figured I'd order some circuit breakers for my own toolkit of 3, 5, and 7 amps so that I could test games that blew fuses without wasting any, and yet still having overcurrent protection so there was no fire risk, unlike jumping the darn fuse. Of course, the CBS were too expensive to fit them to every single game in the store, likely the reason they included regular fuses from the factory, so I figured I'd buy them for myself and keep them for my personal use as well as for this job, like home electronics projects, or, another job for that matter. I didn't plan on sticking around for long as this place was a disaster. Armed with a circuit breaker to use as a temporary fuse, I opted to find where the short was, by disconnecting all the outputs from the power board and then turning the machine on and seeing if the breaker blows. If it did, I'd know the short was on the power board, and if it didn't, I'd turn it off and repeat the process with one additional cable hooked up to the power board, until I found which branch had a short. I turn on just the transformer and power board. Loud hum and then my CB clicked off. Okay, so it's probably the power board. Pinball and arcade transformers rarely go bad unless you bypass the fuses. These boards aren't cheap nor easy to find, so unless the traces are totally melted beyond recognition, it is usually worth repairing them. I go over the power board with my multimeter and find a bridge rectifier shorted. Okay. So I replaced it. Then there was a swollen capacitor. It didn't actually read shorted, but it definitely looked bad. I replaced that as well. That's not so bad, especially with the fuses having been jumped. However, I still had to test it to see if any outputs were missing and most importantly, that none were over the rated voltage, as the latter can obviously damage other, very expensive parts. I reconnected the power board to the transformer and, with my circuit breaker in line, I turned it back on. Loud hum, and my CB clicked off. That's not good. Well, I did say that pinball transformers rarely go bad, but when idiots try to fix the machine in question by jumping the fuses, that becomes much more likely. So I disconnected the transformer from everything but the main line input, and apply power. With no load whatsoever, the transformer hummed loudly and my CB clicked off. So the transformer was obviously fried. Arcade transformers are relatively expensive, and some are harder to find, as well. The kicker? The boss initially got mad at me because no one else is going through that many fuses. You're the first one to ever run out of them, and now you're out of fuses again. I showed him the pictures of the fuses with tinfoil wrapped around them. I also said that he should check some of the other machines I hadn't touched but the other techs had fixed already. He had nothing to say to that, but he did order more fuses. Then the boss said that the transformer was blowing my circuit breaker because it was unloaded and there was feedback as a result. I asked him to demonstrate that on another machine, but he wasn't willing to do so for fear of burning out another transformer. Because I didn't want to argue with my own boss for obvious reasons, I just let him be wrong instead. In short, that's not how transformers work, they only draw as much wattage through the primary as you're asking for from the secondary. About 2 weeks later I was dismissed, with the boss citing one of the reasons as not getting along with my coworkers. Yeah, the same guys who bypassed fuses, plugged in machines that I specifically labeled as fire or shock hazards, and even better, when they were wiring up a new machine from scratch using one of those multi-arcade boards you can buy online, they initially wanted to ship it off to a customer without testing it first. Not surprisingly, the store ended up going out of business about a month after they cut me loose. If anything, I'm more surprised that the store didn't burn down, nor get sued for a customer's game causing a fire or electrocuting someone.